Hey, what's up everyone and welcome back to CALLOUS channel. I'm Heika and I'm going to run you through the series that happened between Mikmer and PDC for the round 3 of the CALLOUS Invitational series, where the loser is definitely out of the tournament, and series opposing one that you may qualify as a zoomer and one that you may qualify as a boomer, so Mikmer versus PDC respectively. Let's just get started. So, lead preview, Metagross versus Tyranitar. Not much information to get at that point. Tyranitar can fit such a wide variety of teams, and Metagross a bit less so, but still, so not much information. PDC goes to Skarmory. Skarmory revealing potentially a bit slower paced team. Could still be like some kind of special spike thing, but something potentially still more defensive. While Metagross Brewbreaks reveals choice band damages, so potentially a more offensive team, more on the physically offensive side, with potentially Metagross trying to boom physical checks or something like that. Mikmer revealing Magneton, which is, by the way, not the thing you expect the most, given that he just revealed Choice Band Metagross, but still, it indicates that that Mikmer really wants that Skarmory gone, so really likely that he is using some kind of physical offense that really wants Skarmory gone, so maybe with like a Digimons or thing like that that may abuse a lot Skarmory being gone, which is going to happen since Skarmory won't eat the T-Bolt from Magneton. And PDC revealing Moltres is usually not a good news if you're running physical offense, but here Mikmer is running Milotic, which is potentially not what I would have expected if I was at PDC's place on turn 3, but it's also a really bad news for PDC in my opinion, because that's just something that isn't usually seen as a special check, who is checking your Moltres, which means that if you are going to try to use your Moltres to enable another special attacker, it won't work, because Moltres will just run into Milotic, while the more dedicated, if you will, special check will be allowed to be freely used to check the second special attacker. So really, in my opinion, bad news for Moltres, who missed the overhit, who would have potentially forced Milotic into recover, Milotic clicking Hypnosis, missing, but with not much of consequences, double Hypnosis, and we got to see a double Mikmer going to Snorlax and PDC going to Swampert, potentially expecting the Swampert, expecting something more physically oriented. As I said earlier, the fact that you got to see Banded Metagross and Magneton means you have really things that want to abuse Skarmory gone. So you potentially much rather get your Swampert in on double switches as much as possible to reduce the amount of damages it has to take to check things. Here Mikmer reveals Snorlax, which is something that can potentially apply pressure and is the secondary or the more dedicated special check that you could have expected. Snorlax reveals now Curse, so potentially something like Curse Boom once again to get rid of this Kamori, while it just gets rows out. Swampert will click row a bit more few times, revealing Mikmer teams getting spike damage on Milotic, which is, by the way, getting spike damage on Milotic is really huge for PDC right now, because if Milotic gets low, Moltres and potentially the last unrevealed Mon, which most likely is a special attacker, and if we're going with the most classical structure, is most likely a Gengar, which would be like a big 5 Moltres team. They both really appreciate both Milotic and both Snorlax getting weighed down by the spike, since like Gengar isn't necessarily the best special attacker to break Milotic either. And by the way, on the other hand, from Mikmer team, we also are now able to see both Salamence and Gyarados. I was mentioning earlier that Skarmory getting trapped was most likely for a Dragon Dancer like a Salamence, but this doesn't mean that Salamence here is necessarily Dragon Dance, because you also see a Gyarados, which can be potentially the main target of the build for the Skarmory, etc. So here PDC is gonna do something that is quite smart in my opinion, but which also like made some people question, is going to Gengar. Simply, if it's a Mixman, his best way to deal damage to what's in front of him would be to use attacking move that just doesn't hit Gengar that well. And if it's Dragon Dance, most likely PDC's Gengar is bulked enough to leave a flying Hidden Power and retaliate with an Ice Punch. So here we got a Gengar looking at half-life Milotic, and we're going to see one of the most ballsy move of the game, or straight up the most ballsy move of the game, with an Hypnosis on turn 12. If the Hypnosis miss on that turn, Gengar is just really threatening a lot, and I'm not even going to mention how much Moltres can become threatening, even though in the Gyarados and Salamence you can find 2 more ways to pivot around it, but still, this Hypnosis is like a really aggressive play from Mikmer, which pays since it's eating, but which could have had a big drawback. Where was it to miss? So Mikmer, realizing Gengar is really threatening, is just gonna surf it, trying to weigh it down and get it to die, potentially to Milotic, which would mean that this Gengar would just simply have put barely any work in the game, and PDC decided to keep it as a sleep sack, which is logical, and goes to Blissey, connecting the thing on the Milotic, which helps PDC release a lot of pressure and apply pressure back on the game, with a really good double on this Moltres. Because right now, on Mikmer team, you got a 64% Milotic sleeping. You got a lot of stuff that doesn't appreciate at all getting burned, and you get the Magneton, which drops to Milotic, to Moltres, excuse me. So this Moltres double is really threatening at that moment for Mikmer. Going to Snorlax, getting Flamethrower. Now Mikmer has to get worried about a potential overhit. Potential overhit and the burn, which would mean that Gengar either boom the Moltres on the overhit, leave the overhit and boom the Moltres, and Mikmer is somewhat fine, or tries to get the Moltres to overhit something else, which is what is going to happen. Mikmer trying to sacrifice the Metagross and catching the Tyranitar, which was an attempt from PDC to catch Snorlax's boom to like keep the Moltres. So basically it was somewhat of a 50-50, I guess. Wouldn't be able to tell you what line of play was the best, and so which of them did the best things they could do, but both play really make sense in my opinion. Well, you bet it makes sense. They wouldn't be here if they were doing nonsensical plays. So now Mikmer have 6-4 and back in the situation where Moltres is in and threatening. And now Mikmer just can't afford, like even a Flamethrower is getting the 2 HKO on Snorlax, so really Moltres is getting more and more threatening by the second. And Milotic is the switch in here, so trying either to wake up on the Flamethrower or just to sack it to potential HP grass. So getting it, keeping it, and risking the burn on the Salamence for the sake of keeping like the sack on Milotic, since, well, it was obvious that Moltres wouldn't overhit on that turn, nor Will-O-Wisp, so I guess the risk of Flamethrower burn was acceptable for Mikmer, that he decided to go Salamence to threaten it with, most likely, if he's going to go that way, a Rock Slide or something physical on the physical side, most likely revealing he is indeed physical. And there, Salamence Dragon Dance. Salamence Dragon Dance, Earthquake doesn't kill and drops to the Crunch critical hit, which matter in some way, but well, without the critical hit, Tyranitar would not have killed the Salamence, but Salamence would have been in range of like pretty much anything that Swampert could have thrown to it. So still, it could have been ending somewhat differently, but not that much. So Gyarados coming in, threatening the Tyranitar, and PDC deciding to keep his Tyranitar around, and huge crit on the Earthquake from Gyarados, because apparently, according to what PDC said after the game, this Blissey was Thunderbolt, so Gyarados would just have dropped. Had Mikmer decided to stay around with his Gyarados. So this crit is really devastating and pretty much puts an end to the game at that point. We're still going to go through the last few turns, but basically this critical hit just ends it for PDC. Some people have asked if like getting rid of Tyranitar and then going to Chansey couldn't have been a line, or going to Swampert couldn't have been a line. I think PDC decided to keep this Tyranitar just because like there is still the menace of double boom, so you need to keep as much I forgot the word. You need to keep as much sacrifice as you can to absorb those boom. And the other line was going to Swampert. Going to Swampert would probably just go and risk the crit in the same way against Blissey in the end, and just make Swampert take even more damages in the end. So I don't think it was any better for PDC anyway, and I think he had to risk this Earthquake crit. So there he decided like to try to keep playing it around, so goes to Moltres, and Mikmer reveals that this Gyarados is faster and that he's running HP Rock, basically meaning that PDC game is definitely over. PDC still had some odds, this Gyarados being like something, the HP flying, so the stab Ellen power, but it wasn't. He had to go for it, and well, it didn't go his way. It didn't went his way. So now Gyarados and Snorlax and Metagross are just going to run through the end game. Magneton just does some things with Substitute, Toxic, Protect. Yeah, no Substitute, just Protect. Gyarados come back and PDC forfeits because Toxic Swampert at that point is most likely just not checking anything, and anyway, like with those two booms, it's most likely that Mikmer would have just won at that point. So we're here with Mikmer leading 1-0 on the series, and we are going to go to the second game. Second game, lead preview, is basically the opposite of the previous game. Mikmer going with the Tyranitar and PDC going with the Metagross. Mikmer just goes to Fortress. There is no much doubt possible with the Fortress and the Tyranitar reveal that it's a slower paced team, and the Tyranitar is most likely special too. So Fortress coming in, eating the mashes, getting crit, raised for Metagross, a spike goes, and here Mikmer reveals Swampert, which is not something too astonishing, on the Metagross agility from PDC. So Metagross agility on the lead slot, well, I might be wrong, but in my opinion, agility Metagross on the lead slot is a straight up dead giveaway that it's an SD pass team from PDC. And if you combine it with the Milotic just coming right after, it's straight up logical that it's some SD pass team. So there is a Celebi on the PDC team, and Mikmer is revealing his own Celebi. On this kind of team that Mikmer is running, the Celebi is most likely something somewhat defensive, like helping to deal with Zapdoses and special attacker or things like that. Which means that for PDC running his SD pass team, it's just the perfect occasion to go for his own Celebi and try to Sword Dance pass. But the issue here is that Mikmer's Celebi reveals Calm Mind. Can still be some kind of defensive Calm Mind Celebi, but it can also mean a lot of trouble, because basically the kind of team PDC is running right now have a hard time dealing with Super Celebi, so 3M3 attack Celebi. It usually already got a hard time against this set, and here by going Celebi, PDC just gives Mikmer 3 turns to set up Calm Mind with his own Celebi. So PDC's matchup against Super CDB is already bad, and going CDB here, he just straight up give 3 turns to something that was already really looking threatening against his team. Well, obviously, as I said earlier, on Mikmer's team, you usually expect something more defensive in the CDB slot. So, obviously, for PDC, it just seemed like a free pass to something that would threaten Mikmer's team. Unfortunately for PDC, he just signed his loss at that point. Mikmer CDB just calm minds up another time, and from here on out, PDC button passes to Aerodactyl. Honestly, I've seen people asking if he couldn't have passed to something else. You need to know that first of all, on this SD Pass team, Aerodactyl is most likely not most likely, but not always choice band. First of all, and on the second side, even if it's choice band Aerodactyl, if it's HP flying, it needs like CDB to be really bulkless at all to kill it with the hidden power. So anyway, PDC needed to pass these wardens to Aerodactyl if he wanted to have any chance to remain on the game. PDC then goes to Metagross just to see if it's like really super CDB with the 3 attacking moves, so Psychic, Giga Drain and Hidden Power Fire, or just some kind of somewhat offensive Calm Mind CDB but not with the 3 moves. And here CDB reveals the Hidden Power Fire, killing the Metagross, and PDC forfeits because he basically can't do anything. If PDC had been running a Snorlax variant of Sword Dance Pass, he potentially could have went to Snorlax, instead of going Aero. But considering what he decided to do, he most likely didn't add a Snorlax, and it was, I believe, really logical to go CDB from his point of view on that turn. So you can't really blame the guy for going there, because I think anyone would have done the same thing and just get caught by the unorthodox CDB set for this kind of team structure. And so with this, Mikmer just wins the series 2-0, eliminating PDC from the Invitational. First game, a bit axy on some turns, but really well played from both of them. Second game, Mikmer really showed some unexpected things and made it a quick one. Hope you enjoyed. See you maybe next time.